Tetragrammaton. This mysterious and mystical-sounding term has an unexpectedly plain meaning, at least if you know its Greek etymology. It means 4 letters. But the 4 letters here refer to the 4 Hebrew letters that comprise the name of God in the Bible, YHWH, which was most likely pronounced Yahweh according to biblical scholars. In the English translation of the Bible, this 4-letter name is transcribed as Lord, L-O-R-D, all capitalized, or in rare cases, God, again with all the letters capitalized. Some of you also may have encountered this name in English as Jehovah. But why all these substitutes in English? Well, firstly, it is tradition in Judaism when you read the Bible aloud not to speak the name of God as a sign of reverence and respect. So instead of saying the name Yahweh, the readers would say Lord. But there is also a Hebrew word that actually means Lord, so the translators capitalized all the letters to indicate that the word here does not mean Lord, but is referring to the name of God. But sometimes the original Hebrew text in the Bible would say something like our Lord Yahweh, which would then be translated as our Lord Lord, and that would sound awkward. So in this case, they used the word God and capitalized all the letters. So it would go, our Lord God. Follow me so far? Okay, but what about the name Jehovah? Well, the biblical Hebrew writing has no vowels, only consonants. You're supposed to figure out what the word is and supply the vowels yourself when you're reading it. But this can be rather difficult, so later Jewish scribes marked the vowels with little dots and lines underneath the letters. But when it came to the Tetragrammaton, the name of God, the vowels they inscribed under its 4 letters were the vowels for the word Adonai, which is the Hebrew word for Lord, to remind the reader that you're supposed to substitute the name with this word. But when non-Jewish readers translated the Bible, they used these vowels with the Tetragrammaton letters. So the vowels of Adonai, A, O, I, were added to YHWH so that it became Yahovah. Still with me? Now over time, English changed its pronunciation of the letters Y or I in the Bible with J. So for example, John was originally Johann, and also W with V. Don't ask me why it did that. English can be really weird. So the name Yahovah, which was already a mispronunciation, became Jehovah. Hey, but it's not like it's the first time we English speakers mispronounce names. Even Jesus is a mispronunciation, as it should be Yesu or Yeshua. But enough with the pronunciations. What is of far greater importance and interest to us is, what does the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, mean? Because the meaning of this name sums up our experience of all of reality and thus how God speaks to us. So we'll explore the conversation between God and Moses where, among other crucial things, the meaning of this name was revealed in this episode of What Do You Mean God Speaks?, where we explore important ideas, insights, and stories in Christianity for the skeptics who want to understand religion, to the Christians who have questions about their own beliefs, and everyone in between. I am Paul Sungwoo-jung, and this is our 3rd episode of the 4th season. What does the name of God, YHWH, mean, and why that matters? Exodus reports that God spoke to Moses from the burning bush, specifically the angel of Yahweh, the special entity that speaks what God is speaking, but in particular time and space, to particular individuals, appeared in the flame of the bush. This flame, which Moses first saw from a distance, would have posed an inexpressible yet compelling meaning for him. The bush was on fire, but it was not burning up, which would have reminded him of his own people in Egypt, oppressed and suffering, yet somehow not destroyed. And because the bush was not consumed, this small fire in the distance continued to burn, quiet yet constant, without being extinguished. The small flame that did not die would have also been for Moses a glimmering image of his own love for his people and his hope for their deliverance, which continued to somehow burn deep inside his heart, even though his hands were no longer capable of helping them. Such a flame, an undying fire, lighting a bush that will not burn away, calls to people. This flame is whatever it is that lights your way in life, whether it's a dream or conviction or love or something, even when everything seems to go against it. We often can't even articulate what this exactly is because we often do not know what is in our hearts that continues to move us. But it is like this flame, however small, that will not die. And when we do notice this fire, it catches our attention and holds it fast, stopping us in our tracks and pulling us in. It is profoundly personal, and in that sense, it calls to us by our names. And I think that was the purpose of the flame, why the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in the flame of the burning bush. So when Moses caught sight of it, he turned aside from his tracks to go and see it. And Exodus reports that it was when he did so, God called to him by name, saying, "Moses, Moses." So Moses answers, and God speaks to him, "Do not come any closer, and take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground." The burning bush marks a holy place because wherever we find an inextinguishable flame in our heart, that tends to be the personal contact point between each of us and all of reality. Because here's where you'll find the deepest, unchanging love or truth in your heart. It sums up how you live, how you engage reality. So this place or this occasion is different than anything else you'll experience, the most significant part of your life. That's what it means for something to be holy, or rather, this is where it starts. And Moses was on the holy ground, something he cannot simply tread upon like other things in his life, with his shoes on, so to speak, nor can he approach it carelessly. However, all of this is still just the start, an occasion in which God may speak to us. We know this. Just because some dream or hope is deeply meaningful or important to us does not mean that it will therefore come true. Likewise, just because some love or passion we've held on to is incomparably precious to us does not mean that it will never lead us astray or become toxic. Like the flame, such things simply calls to us. But because it calls to us, it is something from which God tends to speak to us and speak in a way that transforms us. The catch is, it still needs to be God that speaks from that flame. To put it differently, what burns in our hearts, however bright, is still judged by reality. What we hope for and aim for must in turn be something that reality unfolds. And God is reality. But how do we know that it is God speaking from the flame? Well, the first part of that answer is something that we explored in our third season. God has spoken to people in the past. The Bible narrates an intergenerational journey in which what God spoke to the previous generation is then continued in the next. So Abraham heard a voice which spoke to him a promise. Then reality unfolded what the voice spoke, even seemingly impossible things, so that he learned that this voice is God that speaks forth all things. The same voice spoke to his son Isaac and his son Jacob, and again reality unfolded what was spoken to them. And each time, God that spoke to them spoke a promise that was passed down to the next generation. Their descendants will become a numerous people, and they will inherit a land of their own. So the first words that God speaks to Moses after calling him were, "I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." So what calls to Moses from the flame is the voice that has spoken to his previous generations and unfolded everything that happened in their lives. Yet, how can Moses know this? How can he know that he really is speaking with God that spoke to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? It would turn out that the answer to that question would be rather distressing for Moses. After declaring that he is the voice that spoke to his ancestors, God, speaking from the flame, addresses the very question that seemed to have burned like fire in Moses' own heart, the question regarding his people and their suffering. God says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people, and I have heard them cry out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned for their suffering. This meant that the flame that burned quietly and constantly for Moses all these years was indeed something that God set alight and was speaking to him. Moses mourned over the misery of his people and was concerned for their suffering. And God, too, even more so, knew the misery of his people and was concerned for their suffering. But what then? Moses' own efforts for his people as a prince of Egypt had been in vain. He was rejected by his own people, unmasked by Egyptian authorities, forced to flee and live in exile in this desert until he was no longer the same person. Yet God continues speaking. So I have come to deliver them from the Egyptians and bring them out of their land to a new land, to a good and spacious and prosperous land, to the country of the Canaanites. And then the proverbial hammer drops. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses does not like the last part and immediately objects. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God responds, I will be with you. The Exodus account presents an interesting idea here in this exchange. God declares that he will deliver the Israelites from their oppression in Egypt, but that also means Moses is to go and do just that. One means the other. Except Moses already tried to save the Israelites and failed, and he was a prince of Egypt back then. Now he's nobody, so what can he possibly do? And the answer is, God will be with him. That is, this time, what Moses will do, God will do. Reality will unfold what Moses will try to bring about. That is, if he follows what this voice speaks. Yet here we may ask, why bring Moses into this at all? Why doesn't God, do it himself? And here is where I find that most people don't quite catch the full significance of the idea. One answer that I've heard often is that God wants to work with human beings, to involve them in his work, like a father taking his child along, and that is indeed part of it. It is what Christians believe. But there is an even more fundamental reason which underlies that answer, and it has to do with a point that is repeated ad nauseum in this series. All of reality is God speaking. But this also means anything that God speaks and does around us is something or other in our reality, whether it's something in nature or something that's beyond our knowledge or something we humans do. See, we have this tendency nowadays to imagine God doing anything as invariably some Superman-like entity sweeping into the scene from the outside. But a proper understanding of God for this is again the analogy of the author speaking forth a story. So everything in a story is the author speaking, but that also means that anything the author does in a story are things that happen in the story, done by things in that story, whether it's forces or circumstances or characters. Yet all of that is still the author speaking. So then the question is, in a story about us human beings, in this case the deliverance of the Israelites from their slavery, what things would God be speaking forth in that story? Which things or characters would need to be part of it? And if it's not Moses, it would still be something or someone else in our reality, because that's what it means for God to speak and act. Now, other things can presumably bring about the deliverance of the Israelites from their slavery, whether it's some natural catastrophe or some incomprehensible phenomenon. And I suppose things like, say, the hailstorms or swarms of flies aren't going to talk back to God like Moses did, going, do we have to? Can't it be something else? After all, the behavior of these things would more strictly follow something like the laws of nature, what the ancient Greeks called the logos. And remember, the logos is God speaking. So then, why is God speaking to Moses, who's unwilling and makes objections, and send him to speak with Pharaoh, who in turn will refuse to listen, and then lead the Israelites, who will disbelieve? Well, because it's their story, or to put it more bluntly, it's their life. Now, the Jews and the Christians have experienced that God that speaks with them is like a loving father, so that God often involves us in what he does. But this is not about God taking us along for a tour of his workplace. This is God speaking to us, saying, "This is your life that I'm speaking forth, so pay attention and listen, so that you will live in a way that you won't regret." See, there are things in this world that we have to take part, whether we want to or not. Reality does not push us, so to speak, to take part in, say, the ignition of cosmic gases into stars. I mean, maybe we will in some distant future, but it's not like it's something that's mandatory for us. But it is mandatory for us to take part in things that ignite within our hearts, and God speaks to us regarding those. So it is for those things that God speaks to Moses and to us, saying, "Go, I'm sending you." But still, how do we know that this voice that is sending us is God speaking? I mean, what if we've just become delusional? That can happen, after all, when we become so obsessed over something that it burns like an undying fire in our hearts. What if we do go and reality does not unfold what the voice spoke? And the Exodus account presents a rather unsettling answer, as God then speaks to Moses, "This is how you will know that it is I who sent you, when you bring the people out of Egypt and return here to this mountain to worship God." That is to say, we don't know, but we won't ever know until we go where we are sent. God is sending Moses to bring about something he deeply hopes will happen, but is terrified to do it himself. And what is worse is that Moses won't truly know that it is God that is sending him until everything is finished. Well, it turns out that what he thinks is the finish line is nowhere near that, but he wouldn't realize that for some time yet, which, if anything, makes it even worse. Moses is understandably afraid and makes many objections. Why would Pharaoh, the ruler of all of Egypt, the most powerful empire of his time, listen to a nobody like him? Forget the Pharaoh. Why would even his own people listen to him? In response, God speaks to Moses and shows him miraculous signs. His staff becomes a snake when thrown on the ground, then back into a staff when he picks it up. His hand becomes leprously white when he puts it into his cloak, then restored when he does so again. Moses is to go to Egypt and show the first sign to the Israelites, to their elders, their community leaders, and if they don't listen to him, he is to show the second sign. If they don't listen to him even then, Moses is to pour some water from the Nile River to the ground, which will turn into blood. But wait, what does God mean, if? See, there is uncertainty in what God speaks to Moses. If they do not listen, Moses will have to show these signs. And when everyone is freed from their slavery and returns to the mountain here, then Moses will know that God spoke to him. Yet God also clearly says he will be with Moses and that God will deliver the Israelites out of Egypt. The ambiguity that we are confronted when we follow God, which we explored in Season 3 with the life story of Abraham, now confronts Moses. Is it really God that is speaking with him? Will reality truly unfold what was spoken to him? On the one hand, the flame of the burning bush continues to blaze, and there are these miraculous signs. But on the other hand, neither guarantees that he will succeed in freeing his people, or that his people will even give him a hearing in the first place. But there is something else here that those of us living in our modern era miss. For the ancients, those living in the time of the Exodus account, the miraculous powers which God enabled Moses to do were rare but not unheard of. That is, there were other people who could do it too, the select few who were trained in esoteric knowledge, such as the magicians and priests of the Egyptian royal court. This is entertainingly shown in the 1998 animated film about Moses, the Prince of Egypt. When Moses throws the staff on the floor before the Pharaoh and it becomes a snake, the Pharaoh becomes amused and calls in his 2 priests. Then, with much greater theatrics and showmanship, they do the same thing, turning their staff into serpents while singing to Moses, "You are playing with the big boys now." Now the snake of Moses then proceeds to devour their serpents, but this does not dissuade the Egyptian court. These powers and wonders, like turning the staff into snakes or water into blood, would have been for the ancients how most of us today tend to imagine, say, what top-tier cyber hackers can do with computers and security systems, at least how they are portrayed in our movies and such. That is, if we were to encounter a character with such skills, what they do will seem like magic to us, but we would also know that there are others like them. In that sense, these miraculous signs do not make Moses unique, not yet. What it does is to push Moses into taking the next step in his journey by convincing him that God really seems to be speaking with him. After all, while turning the staff into a snake is something that a few others can also do, it's not something that he could do before. A large number of miracles of God in the Bible are sort of like that. Again, remember what we explored in the 8th episode of the 3rd season. Miracles are essentially about communication. They are first and foremost about confirming that God is speaking with us, that what we hear is the truth and not some delusion or wishful thinking. Here's a personal example. So, publishing a book in a prestigious university press is a difficult achievement, yes, but nothing that's especially out of this world. Thousands of such books are published each year around the world. Yet my book being published by University of Notre Dame Press was a miracle for me because publishing my book in that specific press was something that God spoke to me about. And because, during high school, I was someone who scored at rock bottom of my class in writing assignments. This again brings us back to the answer that the Exodus accounts presents regarding how we are to know whether it is God that is speaking to us. We won't know until we take the journey. And there are terrifying uncertainties to this journey. It may turn out that God was not speaking to us. Reality may not unfold what was spoken, and we'll discover that we were mistaken or deluded about everything. But it may also turn out that God is speaking to us. But even then, we won't know what the journey holds, what reality will unfold, and how it will bring about what was spoken to us. However, there will be enough reason for taking the next step. You will have to hope that once you do take that step, reality will unfold for you, something that leads to yet another step. And it is not an accident that it is during this exchange, specifically before God shows Moses the miraculous signs, that God reveals to Moses the name of God. Consider what it means for things to have names. Firstly, there's a relational aspect of calling things by name. After all, we don't have names for things that we never relate to in any way. For example, things that we are not even aware of have no names, not for us. Also, names are words that point to things, even if some of those may be purely conceptual. And because they point to things, names distinguish one thing from another. So it points to Paul and not Peter, Thor and not Loki, and in doing so, they inform us to some extent about what they are. But then, what does it mean to name God? Because in case you didn't know, God is not a name. It is a general word for an entire class of entities, namely gods like Thor or Loki, except even that's problematic since God with a capital G is not a god. Again, for monotheistic religions like Christianity, God is not some entity in our reality, no matter how powerful it is. God is reality. So to name God is to name all of reality as a whole. But what does it even mean to do something like that? What could that name possibly point to, let alone describe for us? So here's one way to think about this. The words that refer to God in the Bible describe or point to how we experience reality as a whole, how we experience God speaking. It is these experiences that are being pointed to, being put into words. So when God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, God is first called the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which points to their experience of how reality unfolded in their lives, how a voice spoke to them, and whatever was spoken, however impossible it seemed, came to pass. In a later chapter of Exodus, though, God speaks to Moses and says that God appeared to his ancestors as El Shaddai. Now, El is the generic word for God or deity in Hebrew, and so El Shaddai may simply mean that what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob experienced was a God that is almighty, able to bring forth whatever that was spoken. But El was also the name of the supreme God of the people living in that region, the Canaanites, the God that created the cosmos and was the father to the other gods, which is why the generic word for God was El. This deity was also called El Elyon, the Most High God, who rules atop the mountain at the center of the cosmos. And El Shaddai may be a title that refers to this mountain, according to scholars. And if this is true, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob may have concluded that the one that is speaking to them greatly resembles this supreme creator deity worshipped by the people living around them. Now, Christian missionaries have often done something like this throughout history. They identified God in their Bible with the God of the people they evangelized, if this God is believed to have created the world and rules over all things. Some examples of this are Shangdi for the Chinese and Hananim for the Koreans, and I've heard similar things for the First Nations tribes in North America. But the Bible goes further by making the following point clear. God is not a God, not a God among other gods, not even the most powerful God that created the world and rules over it. God of the Bible resembles the god El in the Canaanite pantheon, but they are not the same. Hence in the Bible, the Hebrew word for God with a capital G is Elohim, which means gods, plural, as in all the gods, except this word is used as a singular. That is, God singular is like all the gods together with all of their power and majesty. But this returns to our problem about names. Elohim is not a name like El. If anything, it's a refusal to have any name. After all, names point to things, which distinguishes one thing from another. Names of gods likewise point to one power or another, creation or light or darkness or storm or war, and to one domain or another, the sun or the sky or the sea or the earth. Yet the word Elohim in the Bible encompasses every power and every domain, as well as the relation between them all. But then, what would it even mean to name all of that, and in a single name no less? What experience could possibly encompass all of that and then be put into words? And the Exodus account presents the following answer. Moses asks God for his name, and God replies, Ehie asher ehie, or I am that I am. Now, I am that I am is not quite a complete translation, and that will become important as we'll see at the final section of this episode. But anyway, the Bible presents this phrase, I am that I am, as the meaning of the Hebrew name of God, the Tetragrammaton, the letters of YHWH, or Yahweh. But why would this phrase be the meaning of the name Yahweh? Well, the Hebrew word for I am, ehie, is the first person singular of the root verb haya, which means to be. And you probably notice the similarity of that root verb to the name Yahweh. And scholars have theorized that Yahweh is actually a variant of the third person form of this very verb, so the name means literally He is. Again, He is not quite the complete translation, but we'll get to that later. Now, this linguistic connection is a theory. We are basing it on what we know about the Hebrew language. What we do know is that the conversation between Moses and God in Exodus strongly implies that this phrase is the meaning of the name. So here's how the account goes. So Moses is trying to avoid going to Egypt by objecting that the elders of the Israelite community there will be skeptical of him and ask him for God's name. So Moses asks, if they do that, what should I tell them? Then God speaks to Moses. I am that I am. This is what you are to say to them. I am has sent me to you. Say to the Israelites, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. And so the phrase, I am that I am, is explicitly connected with the name Yahweh, which is then identified with God that spoke to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then the passage drives home this point by reciting what seems to be a liturgical formula. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. So what is so significant about this name, I am that I am? Well, philosophers and theologians throughout the ages have been fascinated with this meaning of God's name. For this profoundly simple phrase, I am, without any further elaboration, points to the concept of being itself. So take a moment to think about this. What does anything at all that we'll ever experience have in common? Well, they exist. They are. We could even say that even imaginary things exist too, at least in our minds. See, to be or being is a word that points to what is the most universal and fundamental to everything, to all of reality. So if there's a name to God with a capital G, a singular phrase that describes our experience of reality as a whole, we'd be hard-pressed to come up with something other than being. And this opens up many topics in philosophy with many technical terms. And we don't want to turn this into some advanced course in metaphysics or ontology. So let's limit our exploration in this episode to this most pressing question. What does this actually mean for those who, like Moses, speak with God? What does it mean for God named I am that I am to send us on a journey of life that we are usually afraid of embarking? Have you ever had a kid do this to you, or did it yourself when you were younger? Ask a long chain of why. So, why is the sky blue? And maybe you will explain to them that when the sunlight hits the Earth's atmosphere, it is scattered by all the particles in the sky, and because blue light is scattered more, it appears blue to us. But then the kid may ask, why does the blue light scatter more? Or, why are there particles in the sky? We may then go into how light is made up of differing wavelengths, or how matter is made up of atoms and molecules. But the questions can continue. Why are things made up of atoms? Or why do we see colors from light waves? And so on and on. In the end, we'll end the chain by saying, that's just how it is, or it just is. There was a well-known 20th century radio debate between the philosophers Bertrand Russell, who was an atheist, and Frederick Copplestone, who was Catholic. When Russell was asked how the universe came to exist, his answer was basically, the universe just is. Of course, that's not quite correct according to science today, namely the contemporary Big Bang cosmology. But let's take his answer to be the following. We can answer how various things in the universe, and maybe the entire universe itself, came to be by going into laws or principles that science discovers. But in the end, we'll reach something, some ultimate set of physical laws, and when we are asked why that exists, we'll just say, it just is. And the name of God in the Bible points to this isness of reality. That is, at the most fundamental level, reality just is. See, atheists often misunderstand the concept of God, thinking that if they answer reality and its structures just is, that will somehow make God unneeded. However, their answer actually is the name of God, Yahweh. What I mean here is that when we reach the most fundamental level of our reality and we find that we cannot go deeper, What we experience at that point is what the Bible describes as the experience of encountering Yahweh, the name of God. It just is. Except, of course, reality speaks personally with us according to the Bible. So what we experience are the words, I am that I am, rather than it is. This concept of isness of reality is so significant that you'll find a parallel in nearly every world religion and philosophy. So, for some examples, the idea of necessary being in Western philosophy, or the teachings on Tathagata or thusness in Buddhism. Now, before you think that this is just some abstract philosophical discussion, here's one implication to this idea that all of us are dealing with every day in our daily lives. So, have you ever heard the phrase, it is what it is? One sense we use this phrase is not very healthy. There are words of resignation and defeat. So, for example, we won't ever reach the sky. Humans got no wings, so we can't fly. It is what it is. But there's a deeper sense to it that's crucial to how we live. You might have noticed that we actually did learn to fly. But we did so because we asked, why can't we fly? And then learned about gravity and about aerodynamics, and we discovered that we can fly in the sky after all. See, we learn what really is what it is. There are many things about which we say today, it is what it is, but it turns out that it, is not what it is. When we engage reality, we find what really is what it is, how things really are, what is possible and what is not. But as we do so, we will eventually reach a point about which we can only say, it is what it is, namely the point at which reality speaks to us saying, I am that I am. That is something we have to accept, to acknowledge and work with. To put it in Christian terms, that point is God speaking. Now, we did not need to accept that we cannot reach the sky, but for us to reach it, we did need to accept and work with the laws of aerodynamics and gravity. God just is. Reality just is. And that means that there is a level to reality which we cannot go around nor ignore. We must face it. It is what it is, or rather, He is that He is. And this will become crucial for what happens in Egypt and what the Pharaoh does in the Exodus account. But there is one more aspect to this name, which gets at how we experience reality through time as we live out our lives. To understand what I mean, though, we must first get grammatical. Remember that the words I am that I am is not quite a complete translation. Firstly, it may also mean I cause to be what I cause to be, or I bring forth what I bring forth. This is because the verb to be here may also mean to bring into being, depending on the context, and this is especially so since God speaks forth all things. But more to the point, I am that I am can also mean I will be who I will be. This is because there is no tense in biblical Hebrew, so verbs do not indicate whether it's past, present, or future. You have to figure that out by context. Instead, Hebrew verbs have what is called an aspect, which indicates whether the action is complete or ongoing, which is technically called perfect and imperfect tense, but I think my wording makes more sense. So here's an example. Yesterday, I ran around the neighborhood. Here, the action of running has already taken place. It's complete. But if I say, I was running around the neighborhood when I saw an old friend, the action here is incomplete. That is, at least in my story, the action of running is still ongoing. In everyday life, though, ongoing actions are something that will still be happening in the future since, it's still ongoing. The Hebrew phrasing of I am that I am, ehie asher ehie, indicates an incomplete or ongoing verb, hence the translation, I will be who I will be. However, in the Bible, Hebrew verbs that indicate future actions also tend to have this small prefix. But what God speaks to Moses saying, I am that I am, does not have that prefix, and that implies a present tense. So, Faced with this ambiguity, most translators opted for I am that I am. It's more literally something like I am being that I am being, but that would really sound awkward. So why is all this important? Well, have you ever wondered about the specific wording of these following lines? God unfolded everything in their lives, or reality unfolds like a story. So why the word unfold? If you've never thought about this before, it's because this imagery, that of unfolding, comes naturally to us. It seems intuitively true. But why though? Here's one way to think about this. The word unfold implies that there are things that were folded up, which are revealed as they unfold. So what was folded up? Well, simply put, possibilities. Possible things that can exist, possible things that can happen, possible ways that things could go. They were folded up with the future, so to speak. And so, as future unfolds into the present, some possibilities become actualities for us. Remember how the very first episode of this series noted that reality encompasses not only everything that exists, but every possibility. And God is reality. So, folded up within reality is an infinite possibility. And as we journey through our lives, some of these possibilities will become actualities as time unfolds. And that is God speaking. And this speaking is ongoing through time. That is what it means for God to declare I am, and for that I am to be an ongoing verb. Because God's declaration that I am can also mean I bring into being whatever I bring into being. Because in the Hebrew mindset, the verb to be usually also means to manifest something that we can experience. Reality just is. But we experience specific things that exist or happen in that reality, and that is God speaking. So when Moses asked who God is, God's answer is that he will find out by experiencing what has and will continue to unfold in his life. It's a continuous and ongoing process. Names point to things, but the name of God points to how we experience all of reality as a whole. So if the Israelites were to ask Moses to point to God with a name, he cannot point to this or that God, not even a creator deity atop a cosmic mountain, though that was usually the best that people could come up with. God that spoke to their ancestors has no boundary to his domain, no purview to his power, which a name could point to. This God is thus simply Elohim, because this God is like all the gods together but one. So if he must describe this God, he can only say that he is. He just is, because if we ever delve deep enough, that is how reality is. But if Moses must point to something with a name, he must point to everything that has and will happen around them. That's the other meaning of God's name. God will be bringing into being whatever that God will. But the real question here is, what will that be? And this is why God previously said to Moses, I will be with you. See, the Hebrew word here, I will be, is the same verb as I am that I am. It is an ongoing form of the verb to be. That is, God is that which unfolds reality from an infinite possibility. But what will unfold is what God has promised to Moses from the burning bush. And that is why reality is a who. Who that says to us, I am with you, and not merely an it that simply is. At least, that is what Moses hears from the burning bush. But he cannot know whether all of that's true until he takes the journey that this voice is calling him to and find out for himself what reality really will unfold. It's no wonder why he doesn't want to go. And this is why God then shows him miraculous powers. Now, it will turn out that these powers were not unique, nor do these powers guarantee that everything will unfold as Moses hopes. But they light the way for Moses to take the next step in the journey from the flame of the burning bush to his people in fiery suffering in Egypt. because Moses will never find out whether God really is speaking to him until his feet take him from where the bush burns with that inextinguishable fire to what the fire will alight next. So join me next episode as Moses takes his journey to Egypt and witnesses what unfolds from there and find out for himself just who God will be. Thank you for listening, and please follow, subscribe, and share this series with others and rate it on your Apple Podcasts and other platforms. You can also support this series at buymeacoffee.com, which you can go to by clicking on the line Support the Show in the episode description.